Greetings, fellow Earthlings. Today we're going to talk about Pangaea Earth. And I've been talking about whether or not we can take Pangaea Earth that we have over here and fracture the landmass in a single event to give us what we observe. And I think I explained before, we need a lot of watts to do that. I was just comparing the scale to a solar flare, which the scale of the Earth to a solar flare, our planet's really tiny. But I was saying I don't think you can redistribute the landmass to get what we have just by using a solar flare. But while I was thinking about solar flares, I went back to this concept about Pangaea Earth. And I want you guys to just think this for yourselves. If we have a planet like this, what is the likelihood the land side would be struck by a solar flare or coronal mass ejection, a micronova, nova, whatever you want to call it? Just throw something from a sun at the Earth in that fixed arrangement. What are the odds the inhabitants of land will be facing the sun at that time? And that was one of the questions that was going through my mind that ultimately led me to considering what I thought was at that time a major breakthrough, in my opinion, because I never really heard it from anywhere to think about it like that. Now you have a planet orbiting a star, right? So obviously the solar flare is going to come. And when you think about a planet like ours and it's orbiting around, you have a redistribution of landmass already. So for the most part, something's probably going to get in the path, unless if it strikes when it's like directly facing a major body of water. But even that will have an effect on the land nearby. Now in this, I was looking at Pangaea Earth and considering, okay, well, if it's rotating around like our planet does today, and you have the day and night effect, then you can consider there's approximately like a 50% chance the inhabitants of land would be facing towards the star if there was a solar flare or coronal mass ejection of some sort. And that was kind of fascinating to me because of one of the arrangements I had not really considered. I was just assuming that our Earth always spun on its axis, blah, blah, blah. These are the things that we're taught. But how common is tidal locking? I never really thought about this until I went to throw a massive solar flare at Pangaea Earth that we have over here. So you have a solar flare or coronal mass ejection over anything. And I'm looking at this. What are the chances the land side is going to be facing in? That's a pretty serious question to ask, because that's like a matter of probability on whether or not you survive. That could explain potentially one of the causes of a mass extinction. Who knows? But that's when I really thought about this, because I wasn't thinking about this. Tidal locking is a very common phenomenon. All the major moons in our solar system are tidally locked. So if you think of our moon, one side of our moon always faces in at the planet. Now, when you look at this, if you were to apply that concept to this planet, there is actually a logical explanation, not only to prevent the land side from ever being struck by a solar flare, you actually have a very unique situation for the early origins of life. And you actually have an explanation as to how this may have formed. And you can think of all the different arrangements for yourself. Let's go to the topography of Mars so I can show you. What you have is a depression in the north and a raised area in the south. So if you put a bunch of water on Mars, it would be actually kind of similar to what you have on Pangaea Earth, where you have a massive ocean and a massive chunk of land. And in that arrangement, I mean, somebody on this land would then be facing in towards the sun at all times. One side of the land would, because that encompasses the entire southern hemisphere if we're going off of Mars. So if it's the summertime, they're even, like if there's a tilt on, yeah, there is a tilt on Mars. So in a certain time, like they would be more likely, but I guess if the ocean is facing towards the solar flare, coronal mass ejection, nova, whatever, that actually might help prevent the direct exposure. But when you take a tidally locked body and you take all of this landmass and you face it away from the star at all times, so over here the land is on this side. Up here the land is facing up. Over here the land is facing out. Down here the land is facing down here. It never faces in at the star. And that's a very unique concept when you think about that. But actually, when you explain it to mythology or whatever they want to call that, it has a very unique, it implies something basically. If we had this arrangement and we were tidally locked, we would not have no day and night effect. Quite frankly, none of the inhabitants of land would have ever experienced day. They would have never seen the sun. If you think about it from this perspective, while you're looking up at top of the planet, the star would be directly below the inhabitants of land at all times. If all the landmass is on one of the hemispheres, come over here, the star is directly below it. When it's up here, the star is directly below. The star is directly below. The star is always directly below the land. They never get to see it. Oh, yeah. So that really made things uniquely interesting for me while I was going back and processing it. But I didn't realize what else that might imply, because you also have, if you do have an ocean in that equation, guess what? Go back here. This is your primordial soup. If you're bombarding a planet with these solar flares at all times, you're increasing the dosage of electromagnetic radiation. But if there's a body of water on one side of the planet that's absorbing and reflecting the radiation, it's going to trap the heat, keep this side nice and warm. They're still being exposed to increased dosage of electromagnetic radiation, causing a much more advanced rate of mutation. Things like the Cambrian explosion. That's very hard for them to explain. I don't know if any of you are aware, but this poses a serious question. It's a threat to the uniformitarian mentality, basically, because all these forms of life come like in this short period of time. So somebody lost the recipe for primordial soup. I think I might have a suggestion as to how you might find it, but there's more actually. If you were to apply this concept instead of a star like our sun on the main sequence, and you imagine a red dwarf, which are known for increased flaring, then it poses an even more unique scenario. On top of that, when you consider how common red dwarf stars, they comprise like almost 50% of the stars in our solar system, maybe more, or galaxy, sorry, maybe more, and all the major moons in our solar system are tidally locked. Okay, well, that's a little more advanced than a Drake equation, but it seems like you're putting all the components, all the necessary components for life, and this arrangement actually has an explanation when you come back here and you consider one side being electrically etched away while the other side is experiencing accumulation, which actually provides a reason as to why you might see something like this, where one side gets distinctly excavated away and the other side is experiencing accumulation over potentially longer periods of time, where you have something like this. And that's where we got to talk about how we can change very quickly from this into this, because there was another matter of probability I had to ask, and we'll talk more about that later, going back and revisiting some of the steps I took. So good luck, everyone. I'll try and get to the point soon. We'll say that. All right, take care.